I was at yoga, Ethan. Why are you checking receipts now? She said it so casually, standing in our kitchen with a glass of sparkling water, like the question itself was the problem, not the timestamp glowing on my phone. 2:17 p.m., downtown, a place 40 miles from the studio she claimed she never missed on Tuesdays. I didn't raise my voice, didn't even look up right away, just let the silence stretch between us like a wire pulled too tight. Because something in me already knew this wasn't about one receipt, it was about a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. My name is Ethan Walker, 38, project manager, the kind of man who tracks deadlines, budgets, details, the kind of man who notices when things don't line up, and for the past few months, nothing in my marriage had lined up. Olivia used to fill a room just by walking into it, the kind of woman people turn toward without realizing it, confident, sharp, always composed. And for 10 years I thought that composure meant stability, meant we were solid, unshakable, the kind of couple other people pointed to and said they've got it figured out. But stability can be an illusion, the kind that looks perfect right up until the moment it cracks, and when it cracks, it doesn't shatter loudly, it shifts quietly, almost politely, like something asking permission to fall apart. It started small, so small I almost dismissed it, her phone face down more often. Late meetings that ran just a little too long, a new distance in the way she said my name, like she was speaking to someone she used to know instead of someone she came home to every night. I told myself it was stress, that people go through seasons, that marriages bend but don't break, that word people use when they don't want to admit something deeper is wrong. But then came the details, the kind that don't argue, don't explain, they just sit there and wait for you to notice. A charge on our joint account from a place I'd never heard her mention, a rideshare receipt at a time. She said she was already home, a scent on her jacket that wasn't the one she'd worn for years, subtle, different, not wrong on its own, just wrong enough when you start stacking things together. I didn't confront her, not then, because confrontation is loud and messy and easy to dismiss, and something in me had already shifted into something colder, quieter, the part of a man that stops asking questions and starts looking for answers. So I watched, not obsessively, not paranoid, just carefully, like checking the foundation of a house you suspect isn't as solid as it looks. Patterns don't lie. And hers began to form with a precision I couldn't ignore, the same days, the same time blocks, the same vague explanations that sounded convincing until you laid them side by side. And then came that receipt, the one in my hand now, 2:17 p.m., a detail so small it should have meant nothing, but it didn't match anything she told me, and when I looked at it, really looked at it, I felt something inside me go still, not angry, not even hurt yet, just clear. Like the moment before a storm when the air changes and you realize what's coming whether you're ready or not. She stood there waiting for me to answer, to explain why I was questioning her, but the truth was, I wasn't questioning anymore, I was recognizing, and recognition is a different kind of feeling, it doesn't argue, it settles, heavy and undeniable. I finally looked up at her, at the woman I thought I knew, and for the first time, I saw something else beneath the surface, something controlled, calculated. Something that had been running in the background of our lives without me noticing, and in that moment, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever she thought she had built in secret, whatever perfect version of reality she believed I'd never see, it wasn't perfect, it had a flaw, and I had just found it. I did not argue with her, I just nodded slowly and set my phone face down on the counter like the conversation was already over, and that seemed to confuse her more than anything I could have said, because Olivia was used to control, to steering the narrative, to shaping every moment into something clean and believable, and silence does not give you anything to shape. She studied my face for a second, searching for anger, for accusation, for anything she could push against, but I gave her nothing, just a calm that felt unfamiliar even to me, like I had stepped outside of my own life and was now watching it instead of living it. She exhaled, picked up her bag, and said she had to get back out, another meeting. Another explanation that sounded polished enough to pass, and I watched her leave without asking a single question. The door clicked shut, and the house felt different, not empty, not broken. Just honest for the first time in a long while. I stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet, then picked up my phone again and opened the receipt, zooming in on the details I had almost ignored at first: the location, the time, the last 4 digits of the card, all of it precise, all of it real. I opened our shared account and started scrolling, not fast, not emotional, just methodical, like reviewing a project that had gone off track, and the more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Small transactions at places she had never mentioned, rides scheduled at odd hours, gaps in time that no calendar entry could explain. None of it screamed on its own, but together it formed something undeniable, a second life running parallel to the one I thought we shared. I leaned back against the counter and let that realization settle, not as a shock anymore, but as a structure, something with shape and direction. This was not random, not a mistake, this was intentional, repeated, practiced, and if it was practiced, that meant she believed it was perfect, that it could run without being seen. I looked again at the timestamp, 2:17 p.m., and for the first time, I did not feel confusion or even hurt. I felt clarity, because perfection always has a flaw, and now I knew exactly where to start looking for it. I did not confront her the next day, or the day after that, because once you see the pattern, rushing only breaks it, and I needed it intact. I needed to understand how far it went and how carefully it had been built. So I adjusted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way you do when you realize the ground under you is not as stable as it felt. I kept my routines the same, left for work at the same time, came home at the same hour, asked the same neutral questions, but underneath it all, I was paying attention in a way I never had before. Olivia moved through our house like nothing had changed, like the version of our life she had constructed was still holding, and that was the first confirmation that this was not new, this was practiced, something she had grown comfortable with. I started with the simplest layer, time. Because time does not lie if you track it long enough. I went back through 2 months of transactions, lining them up against her calendar, her explanations, her routines, and the gaps started to form clean lines. Every Tuesday and Thursday between 1 and 4 in the afternoon, small windows she filled with vague words like errands or extended classes. At first glance, it looked normal, even boring, but when you stack repetition on top of repetition, it stops being coincidence. I mapped it out on a legal pad. Not because I needed to, but because seeing it in front of me made it real in a way that numbers on a screen do not, and what I saw was consistency, discipline, intention. This was not impulsive, this was scheduled. Then I moved to location, the same area showing up again and again. A cluster of charges within a 5-block radius downtown, places she had never once mentioned in 10 years of marriage. Coffee shops, parking garages, a small restaurant tucked between 2 office buildings, nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious, just enough to build a routine that blended into the noise of a city. I drove there once during my lunch break, not to follow her, not yet, just to see it for myself, to stand in the middle of that space and understand what it offered, and what it offered was anonymity, people moving in and out, no one paying attention, the perfect place for something that depends on not being noticed. When I got back to my truck, I sat there for a while with the engine off, the heat building slowly through the windshield, and I felt something settle deeper inside me, not anger, not even hurt anymore, but a kind of cold focus that made everything sharper. I was not guessing anymore. I was building a picture, piece by piece, and every piece pointed in the same direction. That was when I noticed something else, something smaller than the rest, almost invisible if you were not looking for it, a second rideshare account linked to a different email, one that only appeared during those same time windows, and that detail, that tiny deviation from the life she showed me every day, felt like the edge of something bigger, something she believed was buried too deep to be found. I leaned back in the driver's seat, closed my eyes for a second, and understood that whatever she had built, whatever careful system she trusted to keep her hidden, it was not perfect, it had seams, and I was getting closer to pulling one of them apart. I did not touch that second account right away because rushing into it would only confirm what I already suspected, and suspicion was not enough anymore. I needed certainty, something clean, something undeniable. So I let a few days pass and watched how Olivia moved through her routine, and what stood out was not what she did, but how consistent she was about it. The same calm tone, the same explanations. The same confidence that nothing she said would ever be questioned. That level of control does not come from guessing, it comes from repetition, from believing the system you built cannot fail. Tuesday came again, and I followed my own schedule like nothing had changed, left the house, drove to work, checked in like any other day, but at 1 o'clock, I stepped away, got into my truck, and headed downtown, not fast, not reckless, just deliberate. I parked a block away from where those transactions clustered. Far enough not to be seen, close enough to observe, and I waited. The city moved around me, people walking, cars passing, nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just life happening the way it always does, and that was the point, because whatever she was doing existed inside that normal flow, hidden by it. At 2:11 p.m., I saw her, Olivia, stepping out of a rideshare, sunglasses on, posture relaxed, like this was just another ordinary stop in her day, and for a second, I almost doubted everything, because she looked exactly like the woman I had always known, composed, in control. But then I saw him, Ryan, already standing near the entrance of that small restaurant I had noticed before, and the way they greeted each other told me everything I needed to know, not dramatic, not obvious, just familiar, practiced, like this had happened many times before. I stayed where I was, hands steady on the wheel, watching without reacting, because this was not the moment to step in, this was the moment to understand. They went inside. Disappeared into the same place that had shown up on those receipts again. And again, and I looked down at the clock on my dashboard, 2:17 p.m., the same detail that started all of this, now unfolding right in front of me, real, undeniable, and in that moment, I realized something even more important than the truth itself. She believed this was flawless, that no one would ever connect the time, the place, the pattern, but she forgot one thing. Every perfect system depends on one detail staying invisible, and I had just watched that detail walk straight into the light. I did not step out of the truck, did not call her name, did not interrupt what I had just seen, because confrontation would have ended it too quickly, and I was not interested in ending it yet. I was interested in understanding the full shape of it. I sat there for another 20 minutes, watching the door of that restaurant like it held the answer to something larger than just a betrayal, and when they finally walked out, nothing about them looked rushed or nervous. There was no urgency, no fear of being seen, just the same calm rhythm of two people who believed they existed outside of consequence. Olivia adjusted her sunglasses, said something that made Ryan smile, and for a second, I saw a version of her I had not seen in a long time, lighter, more engaged, almost like the version of her I remembered from years ago, and that realization did not hit like pain, it landed colder than that. Because it meant whatever she had built with him was not accidental, it was chosen. They separated at the corner, clean, efficient, like a routine practiced enough times to leave no trace, and she stepped into another rideshare without looking back. I checked the time again. 3:02 p.m., exactly 45 minutes from when she arrived, precise down to the minute, and that level of precision told me more than any words could. This was scheduled, controlled, optimized. I waited until she was gone before starting my engine, not following, not chasing, just letting the moment settle into something final, something I could no longer reinterpret or soften. On the drive back, I did not turn on the radio, did not distract myself. I just replayed every detail in my head, the timing, the location, the way they moved, and one thing became clear: she had built this to be invisible inside the structure of her normal life, a second track running perfectly parallel to the first. But parallel lines only work if no one steps back far enough to see them together, and now I had seen both, side by side. When I got home that evening, she was already there, sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone like any other night. And when she looked up at me and smiled, asked how my day was, I smiled back just as calmly, because the truth is, nothing had changed for her yet, but everything had already changed for me, and she did not even realize that the detail she thought was buried inside her routine had already been exposed, and I was no longer the man she believed she was deceiving. The next morning, I did something that would have felt impossible just a week ago. I let everything continue exactly as it was, because disruption would only warn her, and I needed her comfortable, confident, unaware. Olivia moved through breakfast like she always did, coffee in hand, light conversation, small smiles that looked perfectly real unless you knew what sat behind them, and now I did. I watched her without staring, listened without reacting, and for the first time, I understood how easy it is to hide something when the person beside you still believes in the version of you they fell in love with. After she left, I sat down with my laptop and began organizing everything, not emotionally, not impulsively, but with the same precision I used in my work: timestamps, locations, transactions, rides, all of it aligned into a clean sequence that told a story without needing interpretation. This was no longer about catching her, that part was already done. This was about documenting the truth in a way that could not be denied, a structure so solid that even she would not be able to talk her way around it. I opened the secondary rideshare account again and traced the pickup and drop-off points, mapping them against the same restaurant, the same blocks, the same exact time windows. And what stood out was not just the repetition, but the consistency of one name appearing as a contact: Ryan, always within minutes of her arrival, always within the same narrow frame of time. I leaned back in my chair and felt that same cold clarity settle in deeper, because now it was no longer a suspicion or even an observation, it was a system, one she had built carefully and trusted completely. And that trust was her weakness, because systems fail the moment someone understands how they are designed. I closed the laptop slowly, not out of hesitation, but because I had reached a point where I no longer needed more proof. I needed timing, the right moment to let everything surface at once. Upstairs, her closet door was slightly open, the quiet detail of a normal house, a normal life, and I realized that the life she thought she was balancing so perfectly was already shifting beneath her feet. She just had not felt it yet, and when she did, it would not be loud or chaotic, it would be precise, controlled, and impossible to undo. I chose Thursday because patterns only break when you interrupt them at their most predictable point, and by then, I knew exactly how hers worked. Olivia mentioned her usual afternoon plans over breakfast, the same calm tone, the same effortless delivery, and I nodded like it was just another detail in a normal week, because to her, it still was. But for me, Thursday was no longer routine, it was timing. I left for work as usual, followed the same route, made the same stops, and waited until the clock moved past noon before stepping into the next phase of what I had already set in motion. Earlier that morning, I had made a reservation at that same restaurant, the one she thought existed only inside her hidden world, a table under my name, Ethan Walker, for 2:15 p.m., 2 seats, no explanation needed. Systems depend on separation, on never letting two realities collide, and all I had to do was remove that separation. I arrived first, sat down with a clear view of the entrance, and placed my phone on the table, not to scroll, not to distract myself, but because everything I needed was already there, organized, documented, ready. At 2:11 p.m., just like before, she stepped out of a rideshare, the same composed posture, the same quiet confidence, and seconds later, Ryan appeared, right on time, right on schedule. They walked toward the entrance without hesitation, without looking around, because why would they? Nothing in their world had ever gone wrong. The host greeted them, glanced at the reservation list, and that was the moment everything shifted, just slightly, just enough. I watched Olivia pause for a fraction of a second as the host checked the name. Her name, my name, the overlap she never planned for. And in that pause, I saw the first crack, not visible to anyone else, but clear to me. I stood up slowly, adjusted my jacket, and waited as they were guided further inside, closer to the point where her two worlds were about to meet, and for the first time since this began, I was not following the pattern, I was rewriting it. I watched her see me before she allowed herself to react, and that was the moment everything collapsed, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that silent, controlled way where the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Olivia slowed, just enough for Ryan to notice something was off. His eyes shifting between her and me, trying to understand a situation he had never prepared for, because in their version of this, I did not exist here. I stepped forward calmly, no raised voice, no scene, just presence, the one variable she never accounted for, and I saw it in her face, that instant calculation breaking apart as reality replaced whatever illusion she had been holding onto. The host stood there uncertain, glancing between us, but I simply said my name, steady, clear, and that was enough to anchor the moment in something real. Olivia tried to speak, something controlled, something rehearsed, but the words did not land the way she intended, because context had already shifted, and context is everything. I placed my phone on the table, turned the screen toward them, and let the evidence sit there without explanation, timestamps, locations, rides, every detail aligned into a pattern that no longer needed interpretation. I did not accuse, I did not explain. I just let the structure speak, because the truth does not need volume when it is complete. Ryan leaned in slightly, reading without understanding at first, then understanding too quickly, his posture changing as the realization set in that whatever he thought this was, it was not contained anymore. Olivia's composure started to slip, not in a dramatic way, but in the smallest details, the hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes searched for something that was no longer there, control. I looked at her, not with anger, not with confusion, but with clarity, and said quietly that one detail was all it took, just one, because no system is perfect when someone is paying attention. The room around us kept moving, people talking, plates clinking, life continuing like nothing had happened, but for her, everything had already shifted, because the version of reality she had built no longer existed, and there was no way to step back into it. No one at the table raised their voice, no one caused a scene, and that was what made it final, because there was nothing left to argue against when everything had already been laid out. Olivia stood there for a moment longer than she should have, like her mind was still trying to rebuild something that had already collapsed. But structures do not rebuild themselves once the foundation is gone. Ryan stepped back first, not dramatically. Just enough to separate himself from something he now understood carried consequences he had never considered, and in that small movement, the entire dynamic shifted, because whatever existed between them depended on isolation, and that isolation no longer existed. I picked up my phone, turned the screen off, and slid it back into my pocket, not because I needed to hide anything, but because I was done proving it. I looked at her one last time, not searching for an explanation, not waiting for a defense, just acknowledging the truth as it was, clear and complete. She said my name, quieter now, different, like it belonged to a reality she was no longer part of, but I did not respond, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been revealed. I stepped away from the table, walked past the host, past the same entrance where I had watched her arrive so many times, without knowing, and out into the afternoon light that felt sharper than it had that morning. The city moved the same as always, cars passing, people talking, everything continuing without interruption, and that was the strange part, because for me, everything had shifted in a way that could not be undone, while for everyone else, it was just another day. I got into my truck, sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel, and felt something settle, not relief, not satisfaction, but clarity. The kind that comes when uncertainty is finally gone. This was not about winning, it was about seeing, and once you see something clearly, you cannot go back to believing in the version that came before. I started the engine and pulled out into traffic, leaving behind the place where two separate lives had collided and exposed the truth, knowing that whatever came next would not be built on illusion, and that was the only thing that mattered.